Welcome agents. It's no secret that RNG and Loot are the hot topics right now for good reason. The overwhelming majority agree that RNG is too brutal and some serious changes are required to fix this sooner rather than later. Now today I want to discuss the issues and offer some fixes that I think will significantly alleviate the issue for right now and offer an RNG system that works for the future. I'd appreciate your feedback, so please leave your comments, drop a like if you enjoy this video, and let's get to it. Okay, so before we get into this one, I want to apologise about the footage in this video. You've probably seen it before, and that's because I've used it before. Now, I've not been able to get any other footage because as of me making this video and write the script or whatever, my Xbox One X has just bricked, so I'm having to go and actually buy another one or get a new one, so I'm having to use the same footage. I do apologise. Hopefully you guys understand. With that said, let's move on. RNG is absolutely brutal right now. You can invest 3 hours a day for 2 weeks or a month, and you won't have any meaningful upgrades to your build. Now, I want to make it clear that I don't think anyone wants it to be super easy to get their build together, and there should absolutely be some element of RNG. But when the chance of getting the gear you want is less than 1%, and there are no systems in the game to help that issue, we have a problem. Now, most of the RNG in the game is RNG for RNG's sake. An example would be the system and protocol mods, which thankfully will be removed in the next update this week. But they were just there for no real reason. They just added another level of RNG, another level of grind that, you know, they've fixed, but it was there. And there's stuff like that in the game everywhere. Now, Massive have created an RNG system where the dangling carrot is so far out of reach, 99% of people just simply won't bother. Now, don't get me wrong, there needs to be a dangling carrot, but it needs to be within arm's reach, obtainable through various ways. Now, I'm not going to spend any more sort of time bashing the current system because you know how bad it is. Instead, I want to discuss the current system and how it can be improved. Now, I've got a list of things I wrote down at work today that I want to go through and explain why I think these fixes are a good step to fixing the problem. It will cover both RNG and Loot. So let's start. So for number one, as it stands, you roam the open world or play missions, activities, or the raid, for example, and you have absolutely no idea or no control over what gear is going to drop. It's pinnacle of RNG. It's that's how I would describe RNG. Now, more often than not, 99.9% of the time, it will be a piece of gear that drops that you don't want for various reasons. One reason is because you can't decide what gear you want to drop. What if they implemented faction target gear? An example would be, let's say, the Hyena faction. What if the Hyenas only dropped Wyvern and Fenris gear and they only dropped SMGs and rifles? This is obviously just a hypothesis, but what if we had a system like this in the game? It would allow everyone to target specific faction missions or activities for the gear and or weapon that they want. Of course, it's not the perfect system on its own, but I have a lot of other changes that combined with this could make this system actually be obtainable within the game and actually give you some control over what gear it is you're trying to farm. Say, for example, you wanted Alps, then maybe you could take on one of the other factions. You know, it would give you some control over where that gear drops. There's still an element of RNG. Maybe you could have 3 different types of gear. Maybe you could have Gilligard, Alps, and Aroldi, for example, attached to one faction. There would still be RNG in there, but it would significantly reduce that RNG, and it would give you some control over what gear you get, and what weapons, of course. Moving on to number 2. Now, currently, you are only able to trade 1 attribute or talent on a piece of gear. When you have a piece of gear like Fenris, for example, which has 2 talents and 3 attributes, this means you require RNG on at least 4 out of the 5 stats on that piece of gear. Now, with the loot pool for attributes and talents being so large, this makes it almost impossible to get the role you require, and it's all down to luck. You might get lucky on 1, you might get lucky on 2, but you have to get 4 for that piece of gear to be the gear that you want. Now, I think this needs to be changed. I propose that every piece of gear allow you to trade 2 attributes and 1 talent. This would again drastically reduce the RNG required to get the build that you want. It's been suggested before that maybe just 1 attribute and 1 talent would be a good change, which I'd agree with, but I still think having to get 3 rolls via RNG is a big ask. 2 things to roll from RNG might be too much, but that's what I'd propose for now. And of course, with these sort of things, you'd iterate it. So for me, I'd start with 2 attributes and 1 talent, and if that was too easy, then maybe reduce it to 1 attribute, 1 talent, or maybe if we had two attributes and one talent, and that still wasn't a good change, or for some reason that was still too much RNG, then 3 attributes and 1 talent, but they'd iterate it so that they got the right balance. I still think currently as it stands, it needs to at least change to 1 attribute and 1 talent. On the same vein, and on to number 3, the current system only allows you to trade offensive with offensive attributes on gear. Why? I really don't see why it wouldn't be possible to trade defensive for offensive, for example. If it's a balance issue, I don't see it. To me, I think that would again give us more control, reduce RNG, and make more build diversity. With this in mind, I think this should also apply to mods. The devs have removed system and protocol from the mods, but I'd go as far as to remove the offensive, defensive, and utility requirements as well on gear. If you want to put 6 utility mods on your build, I don't understand why this wouldn't be a good thing. The only thing that I would change if this were to be implemented are the values from these mods. Offensive mods right now offer the best bang for their buck without contest, and I think everyone would just run offensive mods on every slot regardless of build, with the potential of having 5% or more LMG damage, for example, on every offensive mod that you put on. Why would you pick, say, a defensive mod with a couple thousand armor? You know, you could be looking at 30% damage for maybe an extra 15,000 armor. You're always going to go for the damage in that instance. So I'd propose maybe a balanced tune and pass on the mods to make sure they're all viable if this was a system they were looking to put in place. I think this would be a great addition to the game. It would add more diversity for everyone, and again, it gives the players control over what build they want to make. Okay, moving on to number 4. Now, with the changes mentioned before in mind, there's still an issue with the cost of recalibration. 5,000 plus credits, 67 plus ceramics, and 59 electronics. This is just one example of a recalibration cost, because it varies, but to me this is an obscene amount of materials for recalibration, especially when you consider that with Title Update 4 you can only hold 600 of each material. Now for me this is an example of grinding for grinding's sake. I think the cost of recalibration should be halved at least to start with, and iterated on over time to find, of course, the right balance. The recalibration cost should increase drastically if you keep recalibrating the same thing, just like how it worked in the Division. For me, the recalibration station in the Division worked very, very well, and I don't really know why they've moved away from that for the Division 2. Why is it that I feel like Massive don't want us recalibrating gear and making builds? Now, this change should satisfy the hardcore players who'd have more opportunities to recalibrate their gear, and the casual players as well, who would need far less materials to actually make a build, likely giving them a reward for actually putting in an hour a day or so. I'd say half, but actually on second thoughts, I'd probably reduce the cost of recalibration by 2/3 to start off with. I know this change alone would encourage me to actually use the recalibration station myself. It's not something I use very often, simply because the cost of recalibration is just not worth the time. Going out and finding the materials is difficult enough. Going out and trying to find electronics, you know, that could take me a good hour to find enough electronics just to recalibrate once. I haven't got the time for that, and most players don't. So I think this change would be a good one. Let me know in the comments what you think. Number 5, and let's talk about crafting. Now, endgame crafting is absolutely redundant. Now, Massive have slightly stated before that crafting was never intended to be an endgame tool, but more of a craft this gear for now tool. But I think that's a missed opportunity. So easy changes would significantly reduce RNG and make the crafting station viable at every stage in the game. Now, I propose that a World Tier 5 crafting bench should allow you to craft 500 gear score items when you reach an average gear score of 500. Now, I think they should remove the replica gear, which basically nobody ever uses or has ever used. It's absolutely pointless. Remove this and allow us to craft any piece of gear within the game. If you want to craft a Gilligard mask and you have the right materials, I think you should be able to do it. I'd probably reduce the cost of crafting a bit as well, just like the recalibration. On top of this, if you craft something, you should be able to recalibrate that gear, the same way you can recalibrate gear dropped within the world. I don't understand why you shouldn't be allowed to do that. I don't think the crafting station should become the be-all, end-all of getting gear, so maybe the RNG could play a real part on the roll, perhaps. Maybe the chance of a really good roll could be less than drops from the world, for example. Say from the world, you're looking at 20% chance for a good roll, maybe in crafting it's 15%. I don't know. That way you could choose to craft a piece of gear and get fairly lucky with a good roll, or you could farm the world for a better chance at a good roll, but it still means a crafting station is a viable option. Most people want a crafting station not really for the maximum roll, they just want a specific piece of gear. That's all they really want. And currently you can't do that, but I think with this change that would be possible, and it would remove a lot of the RNG from the game. I hope that makes sense. Speaking of gear rolls and stat rolls in general, for number 6, I didn't realise this until recently, but the armour value on your gear is counted as part of the gear's pool of stats, and that kind of makes sense now. So it's part of the pie, of which is what I talked about recently. You probably noticed that low value armour has much higher attribute rolls, with high armour gear having low attribute rolls, and that's exactly why. To me, this has to be removed. The armour value should be in a separate pool that is determined by the gear score of the item. Now we're going to get onto gear score next, but the system in place now encourages you to keep low value armour for this reason, because it's going to have the highest attributes. And that to me just makes no sense. It reminds me of the generic mod situation, which thankfully will be fixed with Title Update 4 this week, so hopefully they do the same with the armour as well. So for number 7 we got gear score, and I've talked about this a lot, but specifically here I want to talk about roll ranges effectively. Now right now you can pick up a 480 gear score item, and it could be, and probably will be, better than the 500 gear score item you have. Why? Because the attribute ranges overlap so much, and they're so wide, it's a joke, really. Now, gear score within the Division 2 just dictates the max stat range, and with nothing like the optimization station in the game, you are relying on RNG to get a roll that's acceptable. Now, I really think that they need to tighten the stat ranges based on the gear score level. 500 gear score items should 90%, 100% of the time be better than 490 gear score items. This should be especially true for weapons. The higher the level, the more damage the weapon should do, I think. The minimum should always be higher than the maximum of the previous lower gear score. I don't think the recalibration changes to make it look like your gear's more powerful is a good one. I think that they need to make gear score actually mean something, like they did in the Division 1. In the Division 1, gear score actually determined how good your gear was, how optimized your gear was, and I don't know why that's not the same here. But for me, more than anything, they just need to tighten those stat rolls. They need to make sure that gear score, and they can do it in blocks of 10 if they want, but anything that's level 500, their attributes should be better, as a minimum, better than 490 gear, I think, personally. Moving on to number 8, and a huge issue affecting RNG right now are skill mods. Get rid of them. It's so frustrating doing a level 4 control point, go into that box and getting some sort of skill mod, or doing a heroic mission to be awarded with a skill mod. Just doing anything in general and getting awarded with a skill mod is just so demoralising. Either they should be obtainable from another source, or if I had it my way, I'd remove them altogether. And there's a reason for that. I think skill effectiveness should scale with the amount of skill power that you actually have, just like the Division. I think the current system for skills and the power and how good they are just doesn't work. And I think they should go back to how it basically worked in the Division 1. The amount of layers these mods add to the RNG in this game is astronomical. When you think that you've got 8 skills and each of them can have, maybe 4, 5, 6 different mods, that's a crazy amount of RNG added to the already excessive pool of gear and weapons and all the other stuff that's in the game. I don't think the system works as it currently stands, and I think they should just remove it altogether. Who's using plus 28% cooldown on the Firefly skill? No one. I think they're pointless. I think skills need a change, and with the removal of those, and we could do without them. Last but not least, number 9, and this is something I think we should have in the game when the gear score is increased with future updates and not afterwards. Similar to Destiny, I think there should be some way we can bring our current gear up to the new gear score level without having to refarm everything all over again. Now, whether this be a new material or something that allows us to do this, I don't know. I personally don't mind refarming stuff, to be honest, but I completely understand and completely get how frustrating it can be to spend days, if not weeks, making a build to have it made obsolete once the gear score increases. Now, as of right now, gear score means nothing. So power-wise, it's likely not going to make much difference with the increase in the actual score itself. But just like the raid, future content will likely have a power level cap, so you are going to have to get your gear score up at some point. And especially for casual players who don't have the time to actually refarm all that gear, it's especially difficult for those. Hardcore players, it probably won't matter so much. But for the majority of the audience, 95% of everyone who plays a Division 2, this is a big deal. And I think they have to implement a system, not exactly like Destiny's, obviously. I don't think we should be infusing gear or anything. But there should be some way to actually increase the power level of our gear, which would then increase the stats of our gear, the attributes, you know, in a significant way. That's just what I think. Alright, so that's everything. Of course there is more you could add and lots of different ways I've not mentioned to fix the current system. What I've talked about today are a couple of fixes that I really think would improve the game drastically, and I think it's something the game really, really needs right now, and I also think the devs need to stop ignoring this problem. It's the one reason, or one of the main reasons why people are falling off here. It would certainly encourage me to play more than I currently do right now, which isn't very much because of the RNG. Thanks if you stick around until the end, and until the next one, Epic out.